Hello and welcome to this week's Knife in the Back, Axe in the Head Rumour Mill, where we're rounding up 7 reasons to be terrified about Dark Souls 2. And if you love Dark Souls like we do, you'll know we mean the good type of terrified. Now, our first reason is that this game will be harder than ever. Yes, there was that initial flurry of fear when people talked about it being more accessible, but exactly what was meant by that was actually lost in translation. According to director Tomohiro Shibuya, this just relates to making systems easier to understand. Expect a leaner gaming experience without it getting any easier. Specifically, the backtracking present in Dark Souls will be scaled down, ideally without the core experience being affected. Director Yui Tanimura has also said that he has no intent to make the game any easier, and there will be no easy mode. The previous games have come as something of a badge of honour for those brave enough to complete them, and there's nothing to suggest that Dark Souls 2 will be any different. The second reason is that Dark Souls 2 will always treat you fairly. Now, this doesn't mean that it won't occasionally drop barrels on you from above or melt bridges while you're halfway across them, but at the risk of sounding like a suspiciously cruel Victorian schoolmaster, the intention is always to teach, not punish. This works on another level too. Going rigidly against the grain of modern games, Dark Souls 2 will not have DLC weapons and items. So if you want the Dark Souls 2 equivalent of the Drake Sword, by God, you're going to have to go out and find it for yourselves. It's fair to say that From Software wants your time, not just your money. Now, we've heard that the game will have a server, but before you start getting the SimCity cold sweats, there will still be an option to play offline. However, there will be elements to the multiplayer game that weren't previously possible without a server. Details are scant at present, but the experience will be changed and optimized. Up next, we've got the presentation. Shibuya has said that he wants to improve the overall atmosphere, and that starts with the graphics. But rather than focusing on shading and lighting, he wants to show all the gory details on a more expressive cast of monsters. But the modifications go deeper than graphical fidelity. Dark Souls 2 is all about finding new and exciting ways to make you extraordinarily sad. In addition to all the monsters, slime and shadow, Dark Souls 2 will force players to face phobias such as vertigo, and use things like auditory hallucinations to bugger up your senses. Now personally, we have phobias about buttons, spiders, and dying in agony, so we're excited to see what nightmarish creations the game will throw at us. Now, moving on from this, you should be worried especially if you're afraid of the dark. The sequel promises to use more dynamic light and shadow, so you'll have to take torches into the gloom and pray they don't run out at the wrong moment. Just like in the catacombs in Dark Souls 1, carrying a torch also means that your second hand will be out of commission, so you won't be able to use a shield or secondary attacks. Next up, we've got the world. Speaking to Famitsu, former director Hidetaka Miyazaki explained that the game won't be set in Lordran. He suggested that if the previous game was like the Arctic, Dark Souls 2 is like Antarctica. He also reiterated that the key word for the game is time, both the idea of time as a high-end concept and the passing of time in the game. Now, this suggests perhaps we'll see a dynamic day-night cycle, an especially compelling argument when you consider the newly revamped lighting system we mentioned before. What's the one thing worse than fighting the Taurus demon? Fighting him at night. In terms of size, it'll be a slightly larger Painscape of Misery than it was last time, but it won't be open world. The original map style of Dark Souls returns, so you'll still get that tentative feel of exploring a new area full of monsters with new ways to kill you dead. And if you don't want that, I'm not sure we can be friends anymore. At number 5, we have the team, and while things have changed, From Software has certainly taken an if it ain't broke, don't fix it attitude. Former director Hidetaka Miyazaki is still on board as supervisor, so it'll still be nails hard, and he's got nothing but glowing things to say about the new head honchos. Although there's a brand new hero, new story and a new world, there's much here that's familiar. Your character will still be carrying an affliction, and you still have to go on a long, grueling journey to cure yourself. The intention is still to let the story grow organically, without any forced, heavy gauntleted storytelling. In 6th place, we've got enemies. Now this time around they'll be smarter, more persistent and even tougher. As we saw in the preview gameplay, your new foes react dynamically to your moves. Sneak behind them and there's a chance they could fall backwards and flatten you. The level structure has also been altered, so you'll no longer have that soft comfort blanket of familiarity. You should expect to encounter the boss at any time during the level, not just the end. Intriguingly, bosses can also be defeated before the traditional boss encounter moment, much like the end boss fight in Metal Gear Solid 3. As ever, the mantra with Dark Souls 2 is to expect the unexpected. Now, with this in mind, there are far more traps in the sequel. We've seen a level that has almost no enemy NPCs whatsoever, just endless bone-shattering, skin-flaying traps. And as ever, the intent here is not to unfairly brutalise players. Well, maybe a little bit, but instead to force an understanding of exactly why they died. And finally, we've got the surprising inclusion of vehicles. A particularly cruel example is the Scythe Chariot in the gameplay demo, but the developers have also talked about levels set on board vehicles, the most surprising of which is a ship. Now, thankfully, there are no plans to let you take control of these machines. This isn't the Prepare to Drive edition. But the prospect of traversing an endless bleak sea full of murderous leviathans is enough to get us truly excited. Well, that's all we've got for now, but please stay tuned, and if you've missed it so far, don't forget that Namco Bandai is running a competition on Facebook to design your own shield, with a chance of it being included in the final game. Hit the Facebook link in the description and you could see your artistic vision mangled by unspeakable horrors in the finished version of the game. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and the last one to regain their humanity is a rotten egg.